What's up, YouTube? This is the 82 and 0 podcast. This time we're going to look at Dennis Rodman. Rodman was born May 13th, 1961. And thing is about Rodman, he's lived enough life for 10,000 people. He has the most incredible life story you'll probably ever hear. Now, he was born in Trenton, New Jersey. He was raised by a single mom. Her name was Shirley. His father is said to have 26 to 28 children. However, Rodman claims his father had 47 children. His father left him settling in the Philippines, starting families over there. So Rodman was brought up extremely poor. And his mom had to work quite a few jobs to support him. And although his father and him eventually reconciled in 2012, he didn't know him growing up. He had two older sisters living with him. Their names are Deborah and Kim. And they were really great basketball athletes. Now, growing up, Dennis, however, was not a basketball player. Like I said, he was born in Trenton. He moved to Dallas in the Oak Cliff section, which is the absolute worst part of Dallas. His mom did the best to provide for him. Now, in high school, Dennis Rodman was 5'6" as a freshman. And then when he finished high school, he was 5'10". So it wasn't looking like he'd be a basketball player. His sisters were very great basketball players. They won three state basketball championships. And Rodman was kind of a loner when he was growing up. He wasn't good at sports. It said he couldn't even hit a layup. That's his words. But after high school, he worked odds and end jobs. He was a garbage man for a while. He worked at an airport, the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. And he was even homeless at one point. But he hit a very, very late growth spurt. He went from 5'10" to 6'7". So he looked at this as a cosmic sign that he better give basketball a try if he's going to be blessed with this height. So a family friend tipped off the coach of a very tiny college, which was called Cook County College, which is now called the North Central Texas College in Gainesville, Texas. And this is a tiny, tiny college. To my knowledge, too, this is I think he's the only player to ever come from that college. But he would end up transferring after putting up 17 points and 13 rebounds per game. He dropped out due to poor academic performance, but he transferred to Southeastern Oklahoma State University. And it was there that he was a 3-time NAIA All-American. And he led them in rebounded in 85-86. And during his college career, he worked at a youth basketball camp where he befriended a guy named Brian Rich. And Rodman actually saved the guy's life. And the two became inseparable. They became best friends. Now, Rich invited Rodman to live with his family, and he's from rural Oklahoma. And at first, Rich's family were not up to the idea of a black man living there. They were prejudiced towards Rodman. But once the Rich's family got to know Rodman, they put aside all prejudice they had. And he considered them like his adopted family. And he would help them on the farm, help them with all their yard work and everything, and he considered them his surrogate family. But during this time, when he was living with the rich family, this is a story Rodman gave where in the rural town that he lived in, it was extremely racist. There's a story where he was walking with Rich, the white kid, and a group of rednecks jumped Rodman and they beat him, pulling out a shotgun from their truck, and they put it to Dennis Rodman's head. Because at the time, Dennis was dating this white guy's older sister. And he was hanging out with this kid. So these racists said to Rodman, if we ever catch you corrupting our white women, corrupting our white children, we'll kill you. We don't want you in this town. And they put the gun to the boy's head, and they said, if we ever catch you with this N-word again, we will kill you. And this is the reality that Rodman had in this town, because when he was playing basketball in Oklahoma, the fans in the audience would yell racial epithets at him. It was horrible. He went through a lot. And eventually, he made himself eligible for the 1986 draft. And he wasn't heavily touted. He was the third pick in the second round. So that made him the 27th overall. And he joined Chuck Daly in the Detroit Pistons. Now, the Bad Boys is what they were called. This is a team that featured Isaiah Thomas, Adrian Dantley at the time, Joe Dumars, Vinnie Johnson, Rick Mahorn, John Sally, which actually John Sally was drafted with him. But this Detroit Pistons team, he fit right in because this team was known for being rough and rugged. They were known for being physical, for grinding, working for everything they had. And that's been Rodman's entire life. Everything's been a fight for him. And on the Detroit Pistons, you got to keep in mind, most people remember Rodman as the guy with the crazy hair, the tattoos. He didn't have any of that yet. But he was still crazy, don't get me wrong. But he hadn't quite broken out as what we'd known him as later. But at this Pistons team, Chuck Daly, who was the coach, became a father figure to him. He loved playing for Detroit. So in the 86-87 season, Dennis Rodman was a 25-year-old rookie due to starting basketball later in life. Think about how crazy that is. Most rookies are 20, 21, 22. He's a 25-year-old rookie. So he plays the 86-87 season. Nothing really stands out. He puts up 6 points, 4 rebounds, averages 54% from the field. Now, Rodman was never an offensively sound guy. He wasn't a scorer. It's just never going to happen. He didn't have those years growing up developing his offensive game. So Rodman grinded on the defensive end. He worked for his rebounds. He could play the perimeter defense and the post defense. But the 87 Pistons would win 52 games. They'd win the first round against the Washington Bullets, win the second round against the Atlanta Hawks, and they'd go to the Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics. Now, there's an iconic game in Game 5 where Larry Bird steals the ball at the end of the game and throws it off to Dennis Johnson for the game winner, and they won 108-107. And there was a controversial statement that Dennis Rodman made during the time where he was saying that Larry Bird is overrated because he's white. He's saying, why does he get so much publicity? Because he's white. You never hear about black players being the greatest. Although his teammate Thomas supported him, he endured a lot of criticism for this, which he would later backpedal on. giving Larry Bird his praise, but you got to understand at the time it was probably a heartbreaking blow losing that series. Now going into the 87-88 season, his sophomore year, this is kind of when he became glimpses of what he would become. Now, this is the only time he would average double-digit points. He put up 11 points per game, shooting 56% from the field. But this is where he'd start to stand out defensively. He averaged 8 rebounds a game. And this is only in 26 minutes per game. So we were starting to see glimpses of how good he is in his limited minutes. Now, it was in the 88 season where the Pistons would ultimately defeat the Boston Celtics. They'd go back, defeat them in 6 games in the Eastern Conference Finals before they go to the finals against the Lakers. Now, the Los Angeles Lakers had Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy. This is considered one of their best teams. The Pistons, a lot of people hated the Pistons during this time because they wanted to see Bird and Magic in the finals. They wanted to see, to a lesser extent around this time, maybe more true later, they wanted to see Michael Jordan in the finals. They didn't want to see the Pistons make it. The Pistons played a very ugly brand of basketball. They were extremely physical. And Rodman was he was at the forefront of this. Him, Rick Mahorn, the whole team. Isaiah Thomas, no one liked this team unless you were from Detroit. Bill Laimbeer was another guy on that team. They hated him. So when they went to the finals, it comes down to 7 games with the Los Angeles Lakers. And if you watch this 7th game, it goes down to the wire. And there's a very controversial call at the end of this game where Kareem Abdul-Jabbar gets a ghost foul. What I mean by that is they call foul on the Pistons and Kareem gets awarded these free throws. But anyone who sees this footage, you can look this up, it's an extremely controversial call. So this pissed the Pistons off. No pun intended. And they made it their mission to go back. And so in 89, they come back, and this is one of the greatest NBA teams in history. They win 63 games, only losing 19. They're one of the greatest defensive teams in NBA history. So let's talk about their playoff run. In the first round, they're matched up with the Celtics. Larry Bird, they defeat them 3-0. Second round, they're matched up against the Milwaukee Bucks, beat them 4-0. And in the conference the conference finals, they're matched up with the Chicago Bulls, which would become their rival in the late 80s. And they defeated them 4-2. Now, going into the finals, they got their revenge on the Lakers. They defeated the Lakers 4-0. So they were officially champions. And Dennis Rodman that year put up 9 points, 9 rebounds. And he made his first all-defensive selection that year, I believe. But this is when the Pistons arrived. And like I said, this pissed a lot of people off because it was supposed to be the Celtics winning. It was supposed to be the Lakers winning. It was supposed to be the Bulls winning. Nobody liked seeing this team win. And that's what they loved. It fueled them. So going into the 1990 season, there was an expansion team And so anytime the NBA adds a new team to the league, there's a draft. So all the teams get to protect what players they don't want to be recruited to this new team. So I think it's like 8 or 9 players they get to protect. So like 3 or 4 players this new team can select. So they lost one of their core guys in Rick Mahorn. But this meant more minutes for Dennis Rodman. He actually started 43 games that year out of the possible 82 that he played. And he saw a bigger role from him, and he won Defensive Player of the Year, his first one. And they go to the conference finals against the Bulls again. This time they beat them in 7. And they go to the finals. They beat the Portland Trailblazers 4-1. Not much competition. So this Pistons team is starting to look like a new dynasty. You got Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer, Vinnie Johnson, James Edwards, Mark Aguirre, John Sally. But all things come to an end. In the 91 season, the Bulls were knocking too loud at this point, and they go back to the conference finals against the Chicago Bulls, and the Bulls obliterate them. They sweep them 4-0. And unfortunately, in that game 4, with the closing seconds of the game, the Piston players walk off. They don't shake the Bulls' hands. They walk right off. So this infuriates people more to hate the Detroit Pistons. But around this time, this is when their dynasty really started coming to an end. They weren't an old team. This is kind of a misconception that gets put out there a lot. People say the Bulls only won because the Pistons got old. That's not true. Joe Dumars was only 27. Isaiah Thomas was only 29. Rodman was only 29 too. Sure, they had some older guys on that team like Vinnie Johnson, but their core was young. And in the 91-92 season, this is when you knew that they're not going to win another championship. They went 48-34. Dennis Rodman became kind of like an unofficial captain of this team. He won his second Defensive Player of the Year. And this time he had like more of a starting role. He started 80 out of the 82 games. And then this is when you started to see how good of a rebounder this guy is. He had 18.7 rebounds. And he's only 6'7", and he's getting 18.7 rebounds. Because before that, he was getting 8 or 9 rebounds, but it's because he wasn't playing all the minutes. The 91 season, he had the 12 rebounds, but this is when he broke out in the 91-92 season, and he had his second All-Star appearance. 18.7 rebounds, and this is his first rebounding title. Now, in the 92-93 season, this is kind of when his life starts to fall apart because they decide to get rid of Chuck Daly. I think he went to the Nets to coach, if I'm not mistaken. They bring in Coach Ron Reistein. And like I said, this hurt Rodman because Daly was like a father to him. And make matters worse, this team didn't even make the playoffs. So all the change around Rodman was making him depressed. Now, also during this time, he was going through personal battles in his own life because he was married during the time and his wife left him and she took his kid. So he's not only battling his team, which was his family falling apart and losing a father and his coach leaving, but his wife is leaving him She's taking the kid. So Rodman kind of has this mental breakdown in the 92-93 season. And there's a very sad incident. And you got to keep in mind, him and his wife, Annie Banks, they weren't married very long. They were married September 1992, I believe. And so they start breaking up around 93. I remember reading, I think it was 82 days after they got married, they divorced. But anyways, there's a very famous incident in the late 93 where Dennis Rodman just disappeared. Nobody could find him. Teammates weren't able to get a hold of him. And the coach wasn't able to get a hold of him. And there's a man named Craig Seager, rest in peace. He was a very well-known sportscaster, and I'm sure a lot of people who watched basketball in the 90s remember him. He decided to make it his mission to find Dennis Rodman. So he drove all around Detroit trying to find Dennis Rodman. Well, he ends up going to a strip club and he finds Dennis Rodman there. And him and Dennis talk all night long. And Dennis reveals to Craig that he wants to commit suicide. He doesn't think life is worth living anymore. He's tired of losing everybody that he cares about. He doesn't like the change. And Craig Seager convinces him to keep going. He talks him out of it. And those two became very good friends up until the time of Craig Seager's death. Now, this is around the time Dennis Rodman reinvented himself, because he started expressing himself through his hair and his tattoos. And this would be his final year in Detroit. So, in October 1st, 1993, so in that offseason, they traded him to the San Antonio Spurs for Sean Elliott and a first-round draft pick, which was Jerome Williams later. Now, this is when he started getting the crazy hair, the pink hair, the green hair, and he always had crazy antics. A lot of people think, oh, he went crazy when he started dyeing his hair. No, he always had like the antics, but he just looked crazy now. So he got covered in tattoos. He started having weird antics like marrying himself, wearing women's clothes. This is his way of expressing himself, is what he said. Now he goes to San Antonio, like I said, and he gets his third straight rebounding title, 17.3 rebounds per game. He's playing with Dennis Rodman, or he's playing with David Robinson. And this Spurs team went 55-27. Unfortunately, though, they lost in the first round. The 95 season, though, is one of the best Spurs seasons of that decade, because they go 62-20. However, they lose in the Western Conference Finals to the Houston Rockets. This was the year, however, David Robinson would win an MVP. So they had a great team, a great defensive team. And they managed to get Sean Elliott back to that team. So they had Sean Elliott, David Robinson, Dennis Rodman. That year he put up 16.8 rebounds. But like I said, they couldn't get it done in the Western Conference Finals. And frustration was growing because David Robinson was a very conservative Christian. He didn't like playing with Dennis Rodman. They just weren't getting along. They clashed. and the Spurs decided that they were going to trade him. And this might sound crazy, but at the time, a lot of people thought he was washed up because he was 33 years old, and they thought his career was going to be over. They thought, well, he might only have 1 or 2 years left, so they trade him to the Chicago Bulls for Will Perdue, which is one of the most lopsided trades that I can think of in NBA history. Absolutely ridiculous. Will Perdue. But people are saying, oh, he's done for. Get rid of him. Now, he goes to the Chicago Bulls for the 95-96 season. That's his first year there. And if you remember me telling you, he had a rivalry with them when he was on the Detroit Pistons. So, this is not going to work, is what a lot of people say. What are they thinking, getting Dennis Rodman? He's not going to be able to play with Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. They hate each other. But Rodman loves winning more than he hates Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. And there's a quote I remember from Jordan where he said, he knows Dennis Rodman's going to do his thing. He can have all the wild parties and everything he wants, but when game time comes, he's going to do his thing. And he did. He played 64 games that year, but he put up 14.9 rebounds. And this is the greatest Chicago Bulls team in franchise history. They have the second greatest winning record in history. They went 72-10. This is an absolute juggernaut defensively. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman. People weren't scoring against this team. You know, nowadays it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer they were going to win. But at the time, they're like, their beef is going to keep them from winning. But they did it. Then, in 97, they repeat. Rodman averages 16.1 rebounds per game. They win 97 against the Utah Jazz. And then 98 comes. The Chicago Bulls go 62-20. This would be their last season together. Rodman puts up 15 rebounds per game. He plays 80 games that year, but he only starts 66. And a lot of this was to do with his antics. Is he would frequently, around this time, he would miss team practices. He would go to, for example, he would just go to Las Vegas and party and forget about his team. I'm sure people know about all of his antics. I don't need to tell you guys for 30 minutes. He would kick reporters. He would lick people. I'm talking like players. He would grab people. He had so many crazy antics. And during this time, he married Carmen Electra. I think it was like November 14th, 1998. So, you know, right after the 98 championship. But he was dating her during that season. But despite all of his antics, they got it done. They won their third championship in a row. And Dennis Rodman at this point was 36 years old. So you're wondering, how much gas does he have in the tank? How much longer can he keep playing? So he ends up getting released by the Chicago Bulls. They waive him. And he signs as a free agent with the Lakers because Phil Jackson went to coach for the Lakers. And that was his coach on the Bulls. He only plays 23 games that year. And he puts up 11 rebounds per game despite only playing 28 minutes. But it wasn't working out between him and the Lakers. Him and Shaq couldn't get along. And they waived him. They released him, which is kind of crazy because he's still contributing. He's still a good defensive player. He's still getting the rebounds, but it's his attitude. And he ends up signing one more contract in the year 2000. It was February 3rd, 2000. He signs with the Dallas Mavericks. This, it's his hometown. He plays 12 games, and he puts up 14 rebounds per game. And that was the last we saw of him. They waived him in March. He played February 3rd through March 8th. They waived him. It was all his attitude and his antics. He still had the skill. And by skill, I mean his rebounding skills. But it just didn't work out. And that was the last of Dennis Rodman as far as an NBA player goes. So he ends up, let's talk about his life after basketball off the court. So he would end up divorcing Carmen Electra in 1999. And he's famous for having many relationships. He dated Madonna at one point. But one thing I want to talk about is his North Korea visits. This is something that adds to his life story. This guy's lived 1,000 lives. So, Kim Jong-un, for anyone who doesn't know, is the supreme leader of North Korea. And he's like a brutal dictator. And he grew up as a Chicago Bulls fan watching Dennis Rodman. And he invited, I don't know if he invited all the Bulls players. I'm sure he did, but anyways, Rodman goes February 26, 2013. And he has a really good relationship with Kim Jong-un. They're very good friends. And he's even, for example, in 2017, when the U.S. and North Korea were having tensions, he was said that he was going to go over there and talk with Kim Jong-un, talk them out of war. And Donald Trump, who was the president at the time, sent Rodman to negotiate. And just what I'm saying is, his life is amazing. He went from being born in absolute poverty, being short, to having pretty much a magical growth spurt, to having an amazing NBA career, winning 5 championships, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards. He was an All-Star. And he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2011. To marrying Carmen Electra, he was even in the WWE for a while, to writing books, to being in movies, to meeting foreign leaders. He's lived a really amazing life. And it's really good to see that he never committed suicide. And I'm really happy he stayed alive and stayed around, because all that potential would have been wasted. And let's talk about his career. He's a 7-time rebound champion, 5-time NBA champion, like I mentioned, 2-time All-NBA, 8-time All-Defense, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. And in many people's eyes, he's the greatest defender of all time. Which, coincidentally enough, he never averaged more than 1 steal or 1 block per game. But you'd have to watch him to see how good he was. He wasn't getting those flashy blocks, but he was putting the clamps on dudes. And that's why he's always ranked one of the best defenders of all time. And that's Dennis Rodman's story.